Hi, it's Leanne and I'm here with my reading wrap up for the week. I have managed to read 9 books this week, which it sounds impressive, but a few of them, there's one short graphic novel, one novella, one that I have been reading with my 7-year-old for the last couple of weeks and just happened to finish this week. But still, 9, can't go complaining about that. So I'll crack straight on. The first one that I finished, I've already returned to the library, but it was Strange Weather in Tokyo by Hiromi Kawakami. I've got another of her books up there, I need to check that name. Strange Weather in Tokyo is about a woman who lives in Tokyo and she's quite lonely. She goes to a bar and she happens upon one of her old school teachers at the bar who's quite a bit older than her, but they kind of gradually build a relationship where, you know, they often go to the bar at the same time, then occasionally start doing things outside of the bar and very slowly begin to fall in love. It's a very subtle book, it's a very slow book, it's just a character study, a relationship study. I wouldn't say it's going to be the most memorable book that I've read this year, but it was a nice read. I have the Nakano Thrift Shop by the same author up on the shelf, which I read this while I was waiting for the Nakano Thrift Shop to come in at the library, and now I have it, and I'm definitely not put off reading that. I'm interested to see what else the author can do. So, you know, we're looking at 3.5 out of 5. Nothing massively exciting, but just a nice, just a pleasant read, I suppose. The next book, which I've also returned to the library, was Daring to Drive by Manal Al-Sharif. Al-Sharif is a Saudi activist who organised Driving for Women Day in Saudi Arabia. Before the day actually came, she went driving herself in Saudi Arabia, which is obviously, I mean, as Manal Al-Sharif explains, it's not illegal, but it's not the done thing. She got arrested and ended up spending time in prison because of it. And it's her memoir. It's a story of her time in prison and of her time growing up and how she went from being a very conservative Muslim to the activist that she ended up becoming. It was a really, really interesting story. I already knew a fair bit about Saudi Arabia, but it kind of expanded on that, and it was quite harrowing in places, but it's absolutely definitely worth a read if you're interested in feminism, you know, Islam, about Saudi Arabia in general. It was just I wouldn't say enjoyable read, but a very interesting read. A 4 out of 5 that would be. Next, I haven't returned these books to the library, I've got quite a few here. It was From Here to Eternity by Caitlin Doughty. I read Caitlin Doughty's last book, the name of which is completely escaping me at the minute, but it was essentially her memoir of working in a crematorium, and this continues the theme. She travels around the world basically finding out about how different cultures approach death and funerals and dealing with the body after death. And it was a quick read. It's 240 pages or so, but really, really interesting. I've been telling everybody about some of the stories in here. You know, you've got cultures in Indonesia that can leave the bodies mummified for up to 7 years, dress them up and treat them as if they're still part of the family, which was very fascinating. And yeah, it's just an interesting book. It makes you think a lot about how you want your death to be handled when it happens, and yeah, just very entertaining, lots of fun. I'm going to give up on the star ratings, you know, because I'm absolutely terrible at star ratings. This is why I actually quit Goodreads, because I couldn't handle being forced to pick a star rating for the books that I read. So yeah, you just have to assume if I say I like it, I like it. Next is Charlotte's Web, which you may have guessed is the book that I read with my 7-year-old. It was actually, we've been reading through all the Harry Potters. We're halfway through Order of the Phoenix right now, and we literally have read Harry Potter every night this year, probably going into last year as well, and I needed a rest. I love Harry Potter, but I was ready for a break. So I told her when we got to the halfway point of Order of the Phoenix, we should just read one other book. She chose Charlotte's Web. She knew the story because apparently there was a play at school a few months ago, but she seemed to really enjoy the book. I enjoyed it. I've read it before. It's just a simple story, but it definitely captured Lily's attention. She was really interested in it. I found her sneaking reads of it in between my reading sessions, so that's obviously a good sign. Most people have read Charlotte's Web. I don't think I need to expand much further on that. Lady Susan by Jane Austen was my next read. This is the novella. It is one of Jane Austen's obviously shorter works of fiction. It's told in the form of letters, and it is about Lady Susan, who is quite a beast of a woman. She's quite awful. She's looking for an advantageous marriage for her and for her daughter, who she treats absolutely horribly. She is kind of willing to manipulate whoever it takes to get that to happen. And it's the story told by letters from Lady Susan to her friend, and also letters from her friend back, and also her sister-in-law, who she's staying with at the time of the book. It's classic Jane Austen. You know, it's so much fun to read. I finished reading it and I immediately just want to go back to the start and read it again. Yeah, not much more to say about that except that obviously I love it. When the Wind Blows by Raymond Briggs is the next one. I mentioned this in my book haul the other day, and it was one that I just wanted to get to immediately. I read it, and then as soon as I was finished reading it, my husband read it as well. It's by the author and illustrator of The Snowman and Father Christmas, and this was his first, possibly only, I don't know, adult graphic novel. This is actually one of the original 80s editions. I really enjoy it because it's actually got what members of Parliament said, their reviews. So Tony Benn thought it was really good. But it's basically about this old couple who kind of just tottering about, getting on with their lives, and there is a nuclear holocaust kind of just happens. The epicenter of the explosion is obviously not quite where they are because they survive following it, and they're trying to continue on with their life even though the whole world has basically been destroyed outside of their house, and they kind of have no idea what's going on, and it's really sad, quite hilarious in places. I genuinely laughed out loud at some parts, and it is the absolute blackest of black comedies, but it was so good and such a good addition to my graphic novel collection. I'm really so happy. I think this was £2.50 on World of Books, and I'm absolutely over the moon with it. It was brilliant, and if you haven't read it, you should read it. You should read it. There's a film as well, which apparently is 99p to rent on Amazon Prime. So I think we're gonna do that sooner rather than later, because I imagine that's also going to be brilliant. Next, sadly not as successful, is Tin Man by, I have to say, Sarah Winman. Every time I look at it, I'm just amused by that rhyming. I'm sure it's Sarah Winman, but no, Winman she is to me now. this was the author of When God Was a Rabbit, which was really popular a few years ago, and for whatever reason I was absolutely never interested in reading it. I don't know if it was that there was people who I maybe didn't particularly like were really into it, and so me choosing not to trust their judgment decided I was going to stay away from it forever. I've heard so much good stuff about this that I was hoping it was gonna change my point of view, and then maybe I'd even get to When God Was a Rabbit, but unfortunately it didn't. This is the story of two boys who, growing up, are the absolute best of friends, and one of them ends up getting married, and it's told from the point of view, probably 2/3 of the book by Ellis and the last third by Michael, who's his friend. It's a story that I've read so often, you know, the coming of age story of two young boys, and I'm not saying it can't be done well, but because I've read it so much, I want something new from it, and I never really felt like I got that from this. It was again quite a short one, only about 200 pages, and yet I still, by the end of it, was kind of ready for it to finish. It's not that it's not well written. It's it is told in very simple language, which was I was never offended by it. I was never really into it. It was just there, and I was perfectly content to just finish it and move on. I feel like there should be more to say, but it's I just read it. It went completely out of my mind. I had no interest in going back to it or thinking about it again. It was just the very definition of meh. Next, a much chunkier book. This was The Mermaid and Mrs. Hancock by Imogen Hermes Gowar, which has been everywhere, partly I think because it is such a beautiful book. It's even just the inside, which you can't see so well because it is a library copy, but it's such a nice edition of the book, and it is the very, you will judge this book by its cover, because how can you not pick this book up? But the book in some ways did live up to the absolute beautifulness of it all, and in some ways it didn't. It is the story of a man who is a merchant. He's got a ship out to sea. He's waiting for it to return to see what goods it's going to bring back for him. But his captain returns saying that he's sold the ship and instead has brought back a mermaid. The mermaid, who is basically a tiny a baby mermaid, possibly a mermaid fetus, if it is a mermaid, he gives them to Jonah Hancock, who is the merchant, who decides to put it up for show to make some money. He ends up making a fair fortune from it, and his life changes very much as a result of that. Going alongside the story is Angelica Neal, who is basically an escort. She's a high-class prostitute, and she's a little bit down on her luck, kind of trying to find her way back to the upper echelons of society, and their stories kind of intertwine along with the stories of the girls who live at the brothel where Angelica used to live, the Jonah Hancock's niece who lives with them. Kind of all of their stories are interspersed, and the writing is absolutely amazing. It's so elegant, and so you just want to keep reading it and just letting it wash over you. It's absolutely beautiful. The story, unfortunately, doesn't quite live up to the way that it's written. It is it's told in 3 parts. The first 2 parts I was really, really into, and then when it came to the 3rd part, when everything was supposed to kind of wrap up, it just kind of drifted off. There wasn't some of the characters, there was no real conclusion to their story. It seemed like it was just wrapped up because, we need to wrap this up now, it's going on a bit long. And then it all just ended, and it was really disappointing because, like I say, it was a world that I really enjoyed being in. It's set in is it the end of the 17th century? No, the 18th century. The end of the 18th century, and it was such a really fascinating world to just be in, and I wanted this book to be one of my favourites of the year, and unfortunately it didn't make it, and it's such a shame. But Hermes Gowar clearly has loads of potential, and I'll definitely want to read whatever she comes up with next, in the hope that she's kind of managed to sort out these story issues, because I will happily read anything that she has written. And then finally, I finished this just last night at very late at night. I know I kept reading it to get it done. This was The Tidal Zone by Sarah Moss. It's a book that was really popular a couple of years ago. Everybody was talking about it. I didn't really want to read it at the time because I'd just read Sarah Moss's memoir about living in Iceland, and I didn't love it. I thought, it's very hard to describe what I thought, but basically I didn't like how she came across in the book. I found her quite irritating as a person, her voice in the memoir she was telling, and it kind of put me off reading The Tidal Zone. But it's another one that, it was in the library, it was on the shelf. I thought, we'll pick it up, everybody loved it so much, we'll see how I go with it. And for the first 100 pages or so, I was completely in love with it. It tells the story of a 15-year-old girl who one day is just on the school field and she collapses and stops breathing, her heart stops beating. And the story is told, she survives, by the way. The story is told from the point of view of her dad, who is a stay-at-home dad who gets the phone call and then has to kind of face the mortality of his children. And when that happened, the daughters collapsed to them going to hospital, her having to live in hospital while the doctors try and figure out what happened and why somebody could just suddenly stop breathing. That was brilliant. Normally I will completely avoid anything that involves children being hurt or killed or anything bad happening to them at all, but I didn't find this depressing in that way. It was just really, really well told, almost a stream of consciousness by a dad, but unfortunately as it continued, it was just kind of the same themes repeated over and over and over again in the same way. And I also found myself getting quite offended, and I think this is similar to how I felt about Names of the Sea, which was Sarah Moss's memoir, just how incredibly middle class it was. It was constantly banging you over the head with liberal viewpoints, and I mean, all of which I agree with, but I didn't need them just constantly bashed against us. And also the dad is always banging on about how he did all the right things, all of his children eat all organic things, they don't seem to watch telly, they exercise, they live the healthiest lives you could imagine any children ever living. And I thought that was kind of going to have a point in that, you know, he might realise, oh, you know what, we did all that and his daughter still stopped breathing. But, and you know, maybe you could kind of ease off on that a little bit. Remember that you can also have fun with your children. But it didn't go there. He's still, I don't really know how to describe why it offended us so much. Because, you know, again, a lot of the things that he did, I do. You know, I always try and make sure my kids have their 5 a day. They had fresh food when they were babies instead of jarred food. It's not that, you know, I'm completely in disagreement with the way that they lived. But again, it was just the way it was constantly just hit over my head all the time. And it was just, you know, complaining about, oh, the house isn't big enough. And, oh, there's one part where he's at a swimming pool where his daughter is, his daughter's at a party and he's kind of watching to make sure that she arrives, and there's a complaint that he shouldn't be standing there watching the children. And it's kind of a funny little thing about how, you know, if it was obviously the mum who was standing there, there wouldn't be any such complaint. And he is just there doing that role that in societal norm is the mother's role. But people think that he's a paedophile, which is, and it was quite, it could have been quite amusing, but instead he turns it into, oh, you know, the people who accused him of it, and the woman who works at the leisure centre who's kind of asking him to, if he could step away, it's not their fault because they're so low paid and they're not qualified. And it was very patronising in places. And yeah, Adam, the dad, he wasn't my favourite character that I've ever come across. And yeah, like I say, the story just kind of goes on and on and on and on. There's a couple of other stories interspersed, such as the rebuilding of Coventry Cathedral after it was bombed in World War II, and the story of Adam's dad, who had, his parents were Jews and they had left Europe just before World War II and tried to build a new life there. And I appreciated the symbolic nature of that, about having to rebuild lives in the face of, you know, devastation that happens, whether it's worldwide devastation or personal devastation. But they weren't all that interesting, to be entirely honest. And yeah, in the end it was kind of just, oh, just let us finish it so I can move on to something else, which is a shame because, like I say, the first 100 pages were amazing. And now, after reading this and Sarah Moss's memoir, I'm put off reading other Sarah Moss books, which, even though I've heard really good things about some of them, which is also a shame. But, you know, I tried, and it's unfortunate that I just wasn't so keen. But so all in all, some really good books. Nothing terrible. I haven't read anything really bad this week, but a lot of books that had a lot of potential and then didn't really end up working out, which was disappointing. But I'm now reading Two Sisters by Agnes Sierstad. I always love Agnes Sierstad. I'm probably totally butchering that work, so I'm only a couple of chapters into this, but so far really interesting. And yeah, no doubt I'll be powering through a few more because I do still have about 15 books out the library. My Man Booker long list books have started to arrive. So yeah, and they all have reservations on them from other people, so I'm going to have to get through them as quickly as I can. So I guess, as per usual, I better get reading. So I will see you soon. Bye bye.